Education.
Andisa Ramavhunga is here with me in studio, seasoned business transformation expert and group chief advisor at GCA Consulting. Mr. Ramavhunga, thank you so much for joining us once again, and I really appreciate you coming through to studio. Are you well?
Oh, thank you, Aubrey. Your introduction is flattering. Humility teaches me that I should never assume expertise in anything. But I guess what you're trying to say is we think about these things more often and probably in more depth than an average human being. But there's space to learn.
Absolutely.
I guess that's what my message is. But I'll take it. I'm well tonight. I don't know. How are you?
There you go. I want to find out. I think you need to come to this mic because I'm having a little bit difficulty hearing you. So I imagine my listeners will also have the same kind of difficulty. I want you to contextualize. I want you to help me understand the concepts that you and I have been talking about over the last few weeks. We've been speaking about strategy. And the one thing that I can take away from our conversations is that strategy in and of itself can be your capital investment. If you've thought about your business hard, deeply enough, it can be the very thing that attracts the capital that is going to establish that business or even continue that. That for me was very, very pivotal. And then we started speaking about the idea of value. Yeah? We talked about value and what is value, right? We were able to strip it away from just its, I suppose, agnostic way of being explained as just money. It's not just money. Money, if I understood you correctly, was the way that value usually expresses itself. But value can be expressed in many different ways. I want you to remember that and tick that off and help me see if I've got it in my mind clearly. Then we went off and we started to speak about organizations that have a proper strategy and therefore a value proposition that makes sense. How do we structure those companies? What should we be thinking about? Then we started thinking about the leadership of those organizations. But I keep hearing this term, the developmental state, the capable developmental state. And I know that in many of the conversations that you and I have had, you've said, listen, unless we understand business within the context of the African developmental project, then we will have missed a huge opportunity. Help me understand all of those concepts in the few minutes that we have within that context of development. And what is a developmental state? What is that supposed to mean?
So, Aubrey, you're asking a very loaded question.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure I'm qualified to answer that. Because it does have some meaning, I guess, in politics as well. I'm sure you hear from that perspective of politics around developmental state. But we have views around this. And for as a business, these are one of the cornerstones or the value, as you've alluded to, that we create as a business. But I always like to take things back to what we call basic state. Call it first principle reasoning. To say, why would you need development? I think we need to take a step back that says, and obviously the laws of polarity here, laws of opposites come into play, right? Because we need to almost foreground and background and benchmark ourselves against other people or other nations to say, where are we? And then the gap becomes our developmental gap that we need to close. So coming back, what is development? I think let's understand the context. So we come from a particularly history of the majority being oppressed, meaning that they do not currently possess the skills or the knowledge or the exposure to
or the resources
to participate in the mainstream economy. And again, I want to stay away from politics, but trying to define where we are and why the word development, because I guess in that context we'll understand it. So we generally a country. I mean, if you were to look at our output as a nation in terms of GDP or GNP, whichever measure the economist you'll use, you'll see that we are actually not, in fact, we are back compared to maybe call them European countries. They call them OECD countries or the developed world, right? In terms of output. Complicate that story is you look at the concentration of wealth. And again, economists will use things like Gini coefficient. And I don't want to get into the technicalities of it because I did say that I'm not qualified. They use that measure to explain the distribution of wealth within a nation, and you'll see that even there we're not faring off very well. I said our output is not quite there.
We constantly hear that we're the most unequal country in the world.
In fact, maybe those are the simple words I should be using rather than the economist world. It's inequality is high. Add in the political message that says we've got a triple P challenges, right? Or I don't know, it's triple challenges of poverty, unemployment, and I forget what the third aspect. So we are generally, and I'm saying generally, if you were to take the large segment of our society, it's relatively poor. It's a large part of it is unemployment, and in fact, with us, there's a particular element of youth unemploymentness, which is a bubble. But I'm saying I'm setting context, right? But if you were to look at the aesthetics of it, you look at the infrastructure of the country, you look at the levels of education for the general population, you would argue that we are behind in a very significant way. And I've not mentioned countries that I'm benchmarking us with. In fact, I can take us in a basket and say this is largely true for Africa, although I would argue for certain segments of our population, South Africa fares a much better. But I would like to look at us as a collective and say we fall in the same collective. Now you ask yourself, why do we need development? Of course, we need to raise the equality. We need to raise the access to opportunities. We do need to raise the access of education. We do need to raise the access of skills and exposures of our people. And by the way, if you combine all those things, naturally they will lead to a greater output in terms of GDP or GNP, as mentioned. So development is really around that. Is to say, how do we fast track the growth or progress in those areas that we've spoken about? And again, entrepreneurship is at the heart of it. I'd bring in the angle of entrepreneurship, which is not particularly unique to South Africa. But you will find that they will say that a new business has high chances of failure within the first 5 years. Again, it's subject to all those challenges we've spoken about.
Yeah.
So you'll find that they say 70% or the number is that high that of the businesses will fail within. So again, it's lack of exposure, it's lack of skill set, it's lack of education, and particularly what we're going to be talking about today is entrepreneurship education, what I call the non-financial support that we give to entrepreneurs to equip them with the knowledge and skills to navigate the complicated economy.
Right. So every time I hear the word development and that we are a developmental state, I usually hear it in the context of conversations about whether or not state-owned enterprises are successful or not, and whether or not they are breaking even or making a profit. I usually hear developmental state mantra when we are holding state-owned enterprises to account to say, listen, how come you guys are not making, at least breaking even? And often we will be told, but we are a developmental state. Ours is not to focus on creating profits. Ours is to try and bring development. Explain that to me. What are we talking about when we have that conversation?
Yeah, so and this is where I particularly take a differing view, right? Development by nature means it's risky to do that, because if it was tried and tested, it wouldn't be development, right? It would go to the mainstream market. And that's why when they say, I guess you're mentioning the political aspect of it, that says we're a developmental state and therefore we need developmental policy. And what does that mean? One, I do believe that the market will naturally not fund any developmental mandate because it's risky, and the chances of you making a return out of it is minuscule. I mean, let's take a typical example of piping water to rural areas. I mean, what are the chances that you are going to return make a return from that capex, let alone make a consistent profit out of it? So you'll find that markets will typically not look at that because it will not be lucrative in nature. And this is where development comes in, where you need to find someone with a developmental mindset that says, this is risky. I will do it anyway because we have to do it. But if we do it, we've got another social dividend that will make somewhere else, right? Because if as a hypothetical example, if that nation were to develop or that area were to develop with all these social developmental projects in nature, the chances of them succeeding in the future and becoming a prosperous region are much higher than if we don't put in that in investment.
Sure.
And therefore we need to look at them in a different ways. And coming back to maybe business, and it comes back to, I'm trying to link it now to this notion that you're proposing around should we make money or not. There are areas I would argue we shouldn't make money because our dividend will be realized somewhere else. And the typical place for that is education. I guess we are paying a price as a country for, I would argue, a legacy in terms of investment in education, although we are catching up. So education itself might not bring you that investment, but that social dividend, you'll see it much later on in the output and the skills and the entrepreneurship that flourishes and the caliber of the citizen that you are developing. So it's quite important that we have to think in those ways. So where, for me, government plays a major role is to take that risk.
Do you think we're catching up?
Look, we're making strides, Aubrey. I don't want to critique the current political environment of the day. I did say I'm not qualified to do that. I think you might get a political analyst. But I would say that we come a long way from 1994. And I think we've come to a point now where we either are squandering the social equity that we've built in a way, but we again have an opportunity to accelerate it. I guess that's my best political answer to give to you.
Right. I don't want to go political because we can at another. I really want to focus on the economic and entrepreneurial issues here. I want to bring in the conversation you and I have had about strategy and how strategy, in and of itself, if properly refined, can be a capital generator. Right? That the idea in and of itself can attract capital. How come developmental ideas don't attract capital? If there is going to be a dividend that is going to be gained by investing in something that at first instance doesn't seem to be profitable, but the dividend, are you saying to me that the market doesn't have the long-term or a long-term enough view to understand that strategy? Or what are we dealing with here?
I wouldn't say it's even the
Do you see why I'm bringing the strategy?
I fully appreciate your question. I wouldn't even say that the markets don't take a long-term view. I think that would become an investment strategy of whichever investor is looking at. But by no means do I say that markets don't take a long-term view. They do take a long-term view. I guess the issue that I'm trying to push is the one of risk management. They will take a long-term view where they start to see that the risk is somewhat managed and the returns not guaranteed but protected in a way, and they become optimistic around that return. Development by nature, the returns are not optimistic. It means there is nothing to start with in the first instance. And South Africa finds itself in a precarious situation, right, where we do not have a large enough venture capital market, call it that, that would take at least an idea from concept that will bridge that idea from concept to product. Because I think what we've spoken about, you and I, a great deal, is what happens when you start having an idea that is very closely translated to a product, and how do you then take it to market? And that's what our conversations have largely been about. But someone needs to take a risk, right, from developing that concept, that idea. And I keep on referring to examples in the US, for example, where there's a thriving venture capital. You'd see that those startups are funded in quantums of money before they even reach product, right? Let alone product stability, let alone even gaining market adoption, right? But some venture capitalists will come in there and put in the money and making sure that at least that product or idea sees light of day until the point where it could stay.
Why are the few venture capitalists that we have, and I appreciate that we've got few, right? Why are they not investing in ideas that are developed in developing countries? I'm trying to figure out why, and maybe let me invite our listeners into this conversation. Maybe you are an entrepreneur with an idea, a business idea that would serve a country like ours in developmental state, in developmental stage. And you have found that there is a reticence to invest in your idea. Tell me what you think the reason of that is. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that. As I speak to Andisa Ramavhunga of Ndiso Consulting, because I'm trying to understand how we then take the principles that you and I have been talking about, how strategy in and of itself can be a capital raiser. The entrepreneur listening to us is going to say, these guys are paying lip service to this idea because nobody's going to give us the money like they do in the US or something like that. Yeah.
So the idea that we propose of, I guess what we call bootstrapping your idea. How do you start gaining momentum before you perfect your product, before you even gain greater market dominance? And hence we spoke about starting at some point to say, have an idea, start, because that one brings you into the game. And I guess what we are trying to build with this non-financial support in terms of it's how do we build that resilience within entrepreneurs? Where do we start? How do we think of a business as a value creator? How do I tap into the financial potential that lies in it? How do I scale it quickly? Because by the way, we don't have that luxury like we do in the US, I guess. But that said, entrepreneurs need to start. There's always, I say, in fact, if you go back to some of the conversations we've had, is you can bootstrap your idea through strategic partners, which is one element of your strategy. If you can't raise, by the way, funding from family and friends, because
and fools
and fools, because there's quite a number of those businesses that start that way. I mean, Aubrey, how many people have you lent or even given 1,000 rand because they needed to buy an ice cream maker of some sort, because this is how those businesses start and scale, right? Or someone who needed Imalyama ingredients to start baking. I mean, we do that in one way or the other.
Sure.
But what we are trying to do here is that how do you take whatever minimum, the minimum that the universe gives you, how do you multiply it? And how do you build a business that starts scaling in nature? The reality is that you will have to start more. You will have to start with a minimum viable product. That minimum viable product will need to fit in all those criteria that we've spoken about, I guess, to date. And if not, you need to start thinking about them, because that's the only way you stand a realistic chance of scaling that business and continuing it as a growing concern.
Look, I've had calls from people that have said, listen, even the 350 Rand grant has helped me start a business. I mean, I had a call, I think 2 weeks ago, from a young lady who was saying, listen, I was doing pretty well selling ice cream, right? And she wants to continue to sell ice cream. I said, you're not going to do well during winter with ice cream. She says, no, actually, I'm going to do well. People are buying my ice cream. So I do want us to interrogate that idea. You're saying that the entrepreneur in South Africa is living in an environment that is perhaps not yet developed enough for the kinds of risk taking that you would see in a more developed country like the United States as far as venture capitalists are concerned. And in order to bridge that gap, we need to see entrepreneurs start.
Bootstrapping the idea.
And to start means also to think about what strategy means, what value means, what leadership means, what culture also means. So I want to bring those conversations into the conversation because we've had them, but I do want to get them in a more contextual way. So please, I'd like to hear your thoughts around why it is that you are not getting the funding that you think you ought to be getting in a developing economy. Yeah? I'd be interested to hear your thoughts about that because there's also lots of talk, Mr. Ramavhunga, around here. We need a state-owned bank, right? It's almost reaching fetish levels, that conversation. And I'm not sure whether it's the panacea for all of the problems that we are experiencing in terms of funding for entrepreneurs. But I'll let you talk about that. Let's quickly take a call from, if you want to put on your ears quickly there, Andisa. Take a quick call from Lucky in Pretoria. Lucky, good evening to you. Your thoughts?
Good evening, Aubrey. My comment starts as follows. You see, we need to distinguish between the private sector and the public sector when we have to understand the concept of a developmental state or development in terms of whether political or in general terms. With the private sector, because the private sector has got shareholders, in most cases they are risk averse because they have to account to their shareholders. It's like when you prospecting in mining, you are not sure as to whether you'll get what you are prospecting for. So in terms of the private sector, that would be looked at as high risk. But when it comes to the government, because the government has got a responsibility to create a thriving economy, that is why the SOEs that you made reference to, the best they can do is to break even, as you correctly said. If they make a profit, that will be a bonus. But that is not their intention. For instance, Eskom is here to provide electricity for industries to function, manufacturing to take place. But a company that consumes Eskom's product, which is electricity, if it is privately owned, the people who invested money in that company, from time to time, they will want to see the performance of the company. So for them, the bottom line is very, very important because otherwise, with a poor balance sheet, that company will go down very, very quickly. So the reason why in South Africa we are not having venture capitalists is because most of our business ideas are not original. And most of them are not properly researched. So for somebody to put money where he is not sure whether it's going to come back or not becomes too much of a risk. But government can manage to take that risk because its responsibility is to make sure that it gives everyone a kickstart. But it also assesses the risk as well. That is why you see institutions like CIFA will demand a number of things before they commit to funding a particular project or particular entrepreneur. They need, because at the end of the day, that money belongs to the taxpayer. They cannot just give it away as if it comes from a tree. So at the end of the day, they want to avoid a situation where the AG comes back and say this was fruitless and wasteful expenditure, because the taxpayers will be mad if things don't go right. But if things go right, they are the first ones to be
all right.
Getting too excited.
All right. But Lucky in Pretoria, much appreciated. I think Lucky has painted a very idealistic picture there. I mean, I can imagine if I opened up the lines now to ask entrepreneurs that have applied to all sorts of fund providers that are connected to the government, tell you, I think I'd have a very, very different conversation altogether. But what do you make of what Lucky has said in principle?
I think Lucky, his first statement around government's role, in fact, there's a big government role to be played from a policy point of view. I think if we were to look I mean, I'll take, for example, the PFMA as it sits. You'll see that instrument, I'm sure it has well intentions that we've seen, but I do not think it's a instrument that works for a developing, particularly state where you want to develop entrepreneurs. I mean, a typical example would be if you see a tender going out there, because this is where the state can play, right, to Lucky. This demand on these experience from these particular sectors with this, I mean, that naturally means the business has been going on for a very long time, and it will become onerous, or in fact almost impossible for a small business to start complying. Obviously, other people will argue that there's quotation systems and those, but those are not policed enough for me as a coherent instrument to grow small businesses. Payment terms, for example, are another examples where businesses take very long time to be paid.
In fact, I've been hearing from a lot of business people that deal with government that government is actually making them poor because they don't pay according to the Batupeli principles.
So that said, there's a big role government can take, right? I mean, I had this dream at some point when I sit and I did say I think about these things more than I think an average person. That says, have we ever consolidated the government expenditure? And I'm talking every sphere of government, and see which commodities, services are we spending it on, and then deciding as a country proactively to say, for the less risky, because and again risk is relative, right? But I'm talking about things that are very easy to build capabilities and provide your cleaning services, your security, your stuff, right? That says, where does that government spend go to? And superimpose that to regions. What does that spend do to stimulate entrepreneurial growth and employment in those regions? And do we have a transparent enough government spend that's managed in this way that we are able to influence as people? I mean, I could dream, obviously, forever and come back and report on and put programs and because the reality of the matter is you cannot build an industry out of just a single project, right? You will need a multi-year program that is very structured and managed, and there are necessary transparencies in place to allow people to see what's happening. Again, that's an instrument policy. Interestingly, what Lucky has said, I don't think we are doing enough to encourage venture capital as a country in terms of policy-wise. I'm not a tax expert, but I guess the tax guys will tell us to say what incentives do we have. I mean, you and I, if today we were to club together to try help some people, I mean, do we have a tax incentive that allows us, or at least encourages us to beyond just risk, right? So a state has got a big role to play in terms of facilitating, but it's all policy wide. I do not share Lucky's views that says private sector shouldn't. I think we're all patriotic citizens, and we're not, by the way, by any chance asking the private sector to take uncalculated risk. But again, they could take the similar type approach, right, where we look at the private sector spend, we look at the spend of, and look at the low-hanging or low-risk services and use those to stimulate entrepreneurship and develop the entrepreneurship and empower those township businesses or those small-scale businesses so that they are participating and become a medium to a large type organizations. The reality of the matter is South Africa doesn't have a lot of these large employment type companies, right? I mean, I don't know how many are in the JSE, but I can tell you now, you will count them probably. You will not even feel.
I've heard people talk about, the moment you speak about the JSE, you're not speaking about the real economy. Some people have argued that you are speaking about a conceptual economy. You're not speaking about the real economy in the sense that you're talking about a guy who's got a bakkie, who's got a little construction company, and he is going from gig to gig, right? From construction job to construction job. That the moment you're speaking about the JSE, you're speaking about shares and all of those kinds of. What would the space that venture capitalists be able to occupy in the area that I've just alluded to, the real economy businesses?
Yeah, so again, I would like to think the JSE is also a real economy, because think about who sits there. These are same businesses that create value in our industry. Banking sector, a lot of those guys are sitting there. A lot of the construction guys who are building these buildings that we see going up are sitting in there. So it's a matter of I guess how those businesses are funded, because of their scale, they get to look at their balance sheet differently and maybe get the equity portion of their balance sheet in a way that's probably much easier than a starting business. And this is where venture capitalists can play that role for a starting business. Because think about what venture capitalism is. It's although I know it can get complicated, and again, I'm not a finance guru. Finance guys will come in and assist us. But simplistically, it means you are funding the equity portion. This is the money you do not have to bring back, right?
Yeah.
Because it's tied into the risk of the project. Obviously, the price for it is higher because it's the equity or it's the stake in the business. But this is money you can take to employ in the business to grow it, to get it to a point whereby it can start getting that funding that we spoke about from the market. Because that's when the game starts for a business. And a venture capitalist allows you to bridge that gap. But that said, I guess what we're advocating so that it does not get lost in the mainstream of the message is that through looking at your strategy and the way you design your organization and that leadership, you are able to then bootstrap that idea so that it starts bringing in that equity component that you can then use to raise debt funding to scale.
We've got a couple of calls. Kutlwano is in Linden. Good evening to you, Kutlwano.
Good day, Aubrey.
Yeah, go for it, man. I'm well, thanks. Go for it.
I'm good. I wasn't going to call, but geez, man, I'm struggling.
It's okay, man. We struggled together, brother. Go ahead. What is on your mind?
So I really concur with the gentleman that you've got in studio. I don't think our funding agencies have got young, knowledgeable people in the kind of space that we kind of live in this current age. You know what I mean? And hence why you'll find a lot of funding agencies funding construction projects or fund petrol stations and traditionally businesses that they knew growing up or maybe that made sense to them. And I think there's a bit of a blurred line into the future there, you know. And as soon as government gets young blood into these funding agencies, that can trial and look at these startups like ours. I mean, I was sitting in one of these business dons one day, and we've basically got an idea. It's an ISP idea with everything that's happening in the townships, and guys like Vumatel and Vodacom laying fiber. They actually need to get those customers, and essentially what we are trying to do is we are trying to put together Wi-Fi hotspots to get the data for them and sell that data for them. But we've been speaking to guys like NEF, we've been speaking to the Gauteng Propeller, but nobody gets our idea because it's not been done yet. So
So that's why I keep asking. That's why I keep asking the question, Kutlwano, that I keep hearing, we're a developmental state. And our economic strategies and our institutions need to align themselves to that goal. But I'm not seeing the organizations that are supposed to bring the funding to the businesses that are developmental in nature, hiring the people that have the insight to be able to make the risky decisions to fund those businesses. I'm not seeing that happening. I mean, and your case is a case in point. So my question is...
I'm not either, Aubrey.
Yeah, so my question is, at which point, and if you've been listening to my conversation with Andisa over the last few weeks, and we've been talking about strategy as a capital attractor, right? Guys like you who are startups who understand the lay of the land, who understand the business contextually and what it could do, have developed strategies that none of these guys have ever heard anything about, right?
Yeah.
But it almost feels and sounds to me like we're paying lip service to the idea of a developmental state. We're paying lip service to the idea of strategy being an attractor of capital. So what do we need to do to get Kutlwano's business attractive enough to money if all of what we have done seems not to attract the money?
The reality of the matter, Aubrey, is that we need young blood in these funding institutions, young blood that is going to not necessarily blur out all the old guards, you know what I mean, that basically have been there and know how these institutions run, but are able to sit around the table and query certain ideas or maybe progressive ideas, you know what I mean?
So here's my feeling, and I want to get Andisa into the conversation. I don't think that's going to happen. I think that the answer is gonna come from venture capitalists. I think we need to develop venture capitalists that have that kind of risk appetite. That's where I agree with Andisa, who says, listen, the creation of investment opportunities is not necessarily going to come from these monolithic organizations like you've just mentioned now, because I can tell you right now, if I open up the lines, I'd have disappointment after disappointment because we don't have people that have the imagination, the insight and the foresight to come up with the money for these kinds of ideas. But that's where the business is going to come from. I'm saying that opportunity is not going to be taken by government-sponsored organizations. It's going to be taken by business-sponsored organizations, and that's venture capitalists.
And you're right. I mean, I just got back from a conference called Africa Impact Summit. It was in Cape Town, and it was a private sector initiative, and they're really keen on what we are trying to do. And if all goes well, I think we might have something there. I
want you to stay with us because I know that the guys at Ndiso are interested in businesses such as yours, and I'm hoping that we can pass your numbers to Andisa, because they are the kind of company that's saying, listen, maybe we can be the organization that catalyzes the process of funding coming to organizations such as yours. So, Kutlwano, please, I'm going to send you back to Ntando, give him your number, and we'll get Andisa to contact you, yeah?
Okay, thank you.
All right. Yeah?
Yeah, so I guess I wasn't here to lament on the challenges that government or the private sector in South Africa. I guess I'm here to say, how do we deal with the cards that we are dealt with, right? And it's interesting what Kutlwano is saying. I take you back to our first conversation on strategy, and there was that element on strategy on desirability, which was really about your product plus these other elements of the benefits of the product and the features and the feeling, right, to form a full value proposition. We expanded that idea to say, what need or problem is it solving in the market? Because it's at that level that we need to converse, or people, by the way, would understand, or at least form a basis for understanding or having a conversation. Because the moment we become technical, and I appreciate what Kutlwano is saying, is because we are operators, we tend to be very technical about our products.
Yeah.
And we probably miss each other because, surprise, the people who are sitting at the other end are not technical by nature. They are just funders. So what is the best conversation to talk to them? One is the one that says, this is the need I see in the market, right? This is how big this need is. This is how much it's growing in the multi-year we see it.
Yeah.
And by the way, I think I'm the only guy who can solve it because of X, Y, Z. This is now tying it back to your value proposition. You then come back and to say, by the way, I can also do it. Because now we are testing the feasibility side that says, I understand the work that needs to be done. I understand the resourcing that needs to have. And one of those resources I need is from you, Mr. Financer, because I need cash to buy equipment. And by the way, I've bootstrapped this strategy because of all the funding I need, some of it will be absorbed by a strategic service provider. And these are the arrangements, I have them in place. And I've thought about every little moving component, and I think this venture is viable. To me, that's the beginning of us having that conversation, right? Because we can't, for example, I can get very technical, I guess, about my own space, but I think what we are as a business quickly realizing is that we cannot go to market with the expertise, technical, subtle expertise of what we can do. We must go to the market with use cases. What is it that they can get out of it? Something that they can tangibly see or tangibly reason about. I always come back to this example that says you can go in and say, I'm selling a car. It can rev from XYZ. I know the car is a very simple idea. But when you go to market that and says, I can move you from A to B in X amount of time, you're starting to have a different conversation rather than the size of the engine and the tire, the size of the tires and so forth. So I'm saying maybe what we do need to do is desist from the car itself. Maybe what we do need to talk about is the features. The features that says this thing moves from A to B. By the way, it has windows that you can use your fingers to relegate that.
Are you saying to me that the problem here may be how we talk about the problem?
We're not having the same conversation. And part of what we were talking about with creating a winning strategy is how do you start having a resonant conversation with your stakeholders? And trust me, it will be less about the product itself and more about the need, because all of you guys are seeing the same need. I'll give you a typical example, right? There are people who sell drill bits, and we have this as an organization. Other people want drill bits. They want drill bits of different size with this driller. Other people are just looking for a 10-inch hole. So whether you sell them to drill bits or you come as a service to drill a 10-inch hole, it's immaterial. At the end of the day, the guy wants a 10-inch hole, right? So
but that connects to how do I communicate my value proposition?
Your value proposition, yes, absolutely.
Okay, so
it makes it easier. Aubrey, by the way, I'm not denouncing what I think Kutlwane or Lucky have been raising. That says we still do need a venture capitalistic. But I did say that I'm not here to lament on the challenges that are put in front of us, but how do we deal with what we are given? So maybe the first thing now we need to do is when we go back to funders, we start talking the language that they would understand. And we can, I know they probably have experts, but I could doubt as well with the experts, how far can they take the technical knowledge, particularly of a new thing that no one has ever seen before. So it's quite important that we start talking problem solving. We start talking needs.
I hear you.
We start talking the market, how big it's growing, and whether we have the capabilities to fulfill to it.
I want to take a call from Anele in Sandton. Good evening to you, Anele.
Hi, Aubrey.
Good, man. Go for it.
And also evening to Andisa. This was quite a beautiful conversation. I really love this. Being an entrepreneur myself, and I think just to buttress the latter that Andisa was just trying to address in terms of how do we take what we're being given, to be able to address what the situation is. Overall, I think one of the things is that we as entrepreneurs, we're problem solvers. We're disruptors. We look at a situation that might be a normal situation, but is not giving the actual yield to exactly what it's supposed to be, and we disrupt that particular norm to make sure that we can be able to give the yield that is needed in society. And I give an example a typical example of myself. When I came back from the States back in 2004, I had always known that in terms of the OTT space that we are today, give it, your Netflix and Showmax, was something that wasn't available in Africa. And at that particular point in time, I started playing in the IPTV space. But it was quite a difficult thing because we're still talking about 2G and 3G in Africa at that particular point in time, and in terms of the streaming space. But irrespective of whatever was available, I still went into the space, and I started building IPTV just for close community, hoping for when the fiber space was going to be ready. And at that same time, I was having a lot of conversation with a lot of financial institutions. But they couldn't see exactly what I was talking about in terms of the 10-year projections. when we have that fibers that will probably be available as it is available at this particular point in time. And I believe maybe at that time I was being a little bit more technical rather than having to be able to sell the idea to be able to say this is going to be a multi-million dollar business in the future. Fast forward 15 years later, almost every home, even in the township, do have a fiber connection today. Yeah. Now, the key question is, when you have a fiber connection that goes into the township, plus minus your Alexander and the rest of them, apart from the suburb that we have, what is the value proposition? What can you offer?
I hear you.
To be able to, utilize that particular fiber, because the fiber is a tool, but what can you be able to offer? And that's exactly where I believe Andisa is actually coming through.
Absolutely.
And the only people you can have that particular conversation with are the venture capitalists, because a lot of the institutions are limited in terms of having to be able to, understand exactly what you're talking about.
I want to stop you there because I want to get Andisa to close off for us. Okay. Let me tell you what I'm picking up out of this conversation, and again, it just shows you that we need more time, right? But you're saying to us that I, as an entrepreneur, can be fascinated by the product that I'm bringing into the market, but until I'm able to explain what problem my product fixes, the fascination stays with me. I'm fascinated about, and you're saying that that's the mind shift that needs to happen.
Yeah, and that's the bridge to have a conversation, right, with other people who are not technically invested in the knowledge of how your product works.
So again, it goes back to strategy.
Absolutely.
It goes back to the strategy and mining. How do I communicate my value proposition to the right people in the right way in order for me to get the value that I'm looking for?
Yeah. So I think I was having this conversation with you that says strategy really answers what I call the core, C-O-R-E.
Yeah.
Capability of real exceptional value. What is that? What is it that your business is capable of creating that real exceptional value? Because it's only that you will then start attracting tons of money. Because at the moment, we still sort of like sussing out, even the funders, when you're having a conversation, I can assure you half the time, they're really trying to understand what is this thing that you are trying to sell, let alone making an investment a decision. That's why they'll have these lots of interviews. They'll want to bring in experts. They'll want to go on site. They'll want to see this. They'll want to see that. And it makes it easy once you've crystallized your value proposition and are able to in a simplistic way, be able to understand or articulate how you are creating the value. And it's a function of those three things. That says desirability, that says feasibility, viability. The message is in those three, or in the intersections of those three things.
I tell you when the light bulb came on for me in this conversation, when you said we can have a whole long conversation about drill bits. We can talk about how strong this drill bit is, how well made it is. But if the problem that needs to be solved is a 10-inch hole, we need to be talking about the 10-inch hole.
Absolutely.
Not the drill bit, about the 10-inch hole. So maybe part of the reason why we're not unlocking the value, see, I'm starting to talk your language now, that maybe the reason why we're not unlocking the value as entrepreneurs is that we haven't critically thought about what our value proposition is. We know how to make the drill bit, but we don't know what the drill bit is actually going to do, and therefore are not speaking to that specific issue.
Yeah. So it's about a 10-inch hole, and how many 10-inch holes are out there, and how are they growing over time, right? The moment you will come to at least that realization, you are starting to have an intelligent conversation with funders.
I know that the podcast has started, and I know that this conversation is going to be delved into a little more. How do people get in touch with you?
So we finally coming to at least a minimum episodes that we can go through with the podcast. But I think at the moment, let me still just promise, I did undertake that by, I would say, in the next couple of weeks, I guess. I mean, the content is out there. It's just really a matter of packaging it and taking it out to public, because we do want to get as many of the people as possible hooking into this. We do want as many of the people having these type of conversations we're having. So it's quite important that we create value in the way that we go out to the market, so that we are able to draw in as many people as possible. But if you are itching to contact us, I guess you can go directly to our website, www.ntiyisoconsulting.co.za, or alternatively reach out to us via email, is info@ntiyisoconsulting.co.za.
Andisa Ramavhunga, a seasoned business transformation expert and group chief advisor at Ntiyiso Consulting. Thank you so much for joining us. Really, really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Aubrey.